though I've been in DC for the past 10 years. So I moved up to DC to work in kind of like the nonprofit sector up here, and saw that there was an opportunity to build my skills in fundraising, because it's so competitive up here. And fundraising is something that I didn't really do on a professional level, though I'm really good at asking for money from friends or family, which is an entry into fundraising. But basically, I was hired with by the United Nations Association and learned how to do grant writing with them, and then moved to the Smithsonian, particularly with the Asian Pacific American Center. And that's where I learned how to really fundraise within different areas of fundraising. So not just grant writing, but doing digital campaigns, doing a capital campaign, because the Smithsonian historically has relied on Congress to give them money to provide their programming for the masses, since it's known as the nation's museum. And then Congress was kind of scaling back their support, and the Smithsonian had to diversify its fundraising strategy. So it had to actually go to the public to fundraise. So I learned a lot of stuff there. I've been very blessed to have worked with social justice organizations. So I went to the Asian Americans Advancing Justice next and did a lot of social justice stuff. It was a lot of grant writing, but also particularly with corporate foundations. So kind of got my foothold there. After that, I went to a public foundation. So private foundations actually have their own monies invested in endowments, which they actually give in the form of grants. But I was at a public foundation, which does not have their own endowment, or at least it's not in the billions like private foundations are. So we had to fundraise. And so it gave me a different perspective on how to fundraise, being part of a public foundation. So that was also a lot of grant writing, but in a very different way, because I was an intermediary. I was part of philanthropy, but then having to raise money from philanthropy. But it gave me a bit of an advantage, because at least I looked and sounded like the people that I was supposedly, raising funds from. So that's basically kind of like a snapshot of my fundraising background. If we can we start sharing the PowerPoint, Silva? I think a lot of fundraisers actually say that they fell into it, right? And the different types of workshops that I've gone to, they always tell us, don't ever say that to people, because you don't fall into things, right? But honestly, fundraisers do sort of fall into this, unless at the age of 10 or something, you said I was going to grow up to be a fundraiser, which I don't think most people do. Also, you will get a side of comedy with this presentation, so I apologize if that was not something you were expecting. All right, can we go to the next slide? All right, since I've kind of taken the floor and introduced myself, may I ask everyone to briefly introduce themselves? So your name, your organization, and then this is a big one. What emotion does fundraising evoke for you?
Is this in the chat, or are people?
I would prefer people unmute themselves and say it.
Okay. All right, I'll start. My name is Lisa Sansoni Cromar. I'm with Diaspora and Resistance. Yes. I did fundraising for Medicine Sans Frontières for like 10 years, and yes, I fell into it. And actually, mostly the horror, I would say, is what it evokes for me, but it's a necessary evil. So, I have the $1 million pin for Medicine Sans Frontières. I raised that much money for them, but it was really just because it had to be done, not because I liked it. But now that I'm the director of a nonprofit with, let's see, no funding and a zero budget and things to do. So that's where we are.
Thank you, Lisa.
I can go next. My name is Dina Habal, and I'm with the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition, and I'm a newbie to fundraising, and I would say anxiety.
Thank you.
I'll go next. My name is Fatima Aitrami. I work with the Islamic Center of Orlando, and I have been writing grants for the center for different projects that we have been running. And yeah, the feeling I get is stress and anxiety.
Thank you.
I could go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Ra'a. I am with the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition. And what emotion does it invoke for me? I mean, in my, I guess, experience, I've been doing like field organizing, right? Not really fundraising. So it's very, very new to me. I guess the word that comes to mind is a little bit of boring, because I know like grant writing could be tedious. It's a lot of pages. But yeah.
Thank you.
My name is Sadia, and I am with Preemptive Love Coalition. And the emotion that it evokes for me is fear. And I'm actually not here alone. I have a coworker.
Hello, I'm Lana. I also work with Sadia, like she said, Preemptive Love. And I actually work on our development team with donors, volunteers, and fundraising volunteers too. So I have a good bit of experience, I guess, with fundraising. And like many of you, definitely invokes some anxiety, but I also try to stay somewhat hopeful and also excited to see where it will lead. If I fail, at least it's some sort of learning experience. But if I succeed, then again, that's like good stuff to celebrate and again, see where it leads to in terms of for the organization and stuff, how it could benefit us.
Assalamualaikum. I'm Khadija Hussein from Muslim Women's Alliance in Chicago. Well, the emotion, I guess, is FOMO when it comes to fundraising, because I'm always like, God, there's got to be like money out there that we can use that, you know, they would love to give our organization money. So I'm hoping, I've assisted on some grants, but I've never done any solo. So I'm hoping this kind of brushes up my skills.
Thank you.
My name is Rachel. I'm from Project Streetlight. So we focus on youth literacy and prevention as far as keeping children out of the prison system. And then also we do support the community and basic needs with providing hygiene and sometimes food distributions to homeless. Fundraising is just as nervous as me talking to you guys right now. It brings feelings of dread, and because everything I've applied for, we've gotten a no to. So we basically, we survive on individual donations from people, or the Muslim Women's Organization has been really kind to us. And we've created a lot of great networking there. But I know that we can create such a bigger impact for our youth in the community if we can really get some funding. So yeah, it's scary because you really got to put yourself out there to be able to get the funding, and it opens up an opportunity for someone to tell you that you're not good enough or there's weaknesses or something like that. And that's really scary, especially when you're founding your own organization and it's super personal. Thank you.
I would like to connect with you a little later, like even after this. Because I would like to learn about why you are getting these consistent no's. And hopefully we can work on a strategy so that you get a yes.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Akoa Alexander. I am an attorney.
Did we get everyone?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
So do you hear? Sorry.
It's
Go
okay.
ahead.
I'm an attorney. I'm just here for personal knowledge. The feeling that I get is determination. I feel like it's a necessary evil, and learning a new skill set and being able to be successful at that, I think it's going to be a win no matter what. So
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Michelle. I am with the Muslim Women's Organization. I'm with the Violence Against Women Task Force. And the word that comes up for me is anxiety. I've done nonprofit work, specifically survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault for over 15 years. And always like fundraising, grant proposals, grant writing, all that sort of stuff, like has been a different department, somebody else. And I've always been super grateful for that. But in looking at advancing my career, this is something that is definitely an asset that I would like to have. So I'm here.
Thank you.
Hi there. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Mariam, and I'm an anthropologist and a researcher. So I'm often writing grants, for research in the health sector. And I'm new to the nonprofit world, but always have been curious and have all of these ideas about possible nonprofits that I could either want to support in the future or have in the future. So the emotion that is raised for me is probably curiosity.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Arshia Wajid. I'm from Chicago. I work as a healthcare executive for a hospital chain here for my full-time job. But on my nonprofit work, I'm the founder and development director for American Muslim Health Professionals. It's a national nonprofit organization. And the anxiety is the emotion that I would go with.
Thank you. Did we get everyone?
Assalamu alaikum. This is Ambreen. I'm from Illinois. I'm here on behalf of myself, but I have background in health policy, and I volunteer with several organizations, and I haven't done grant writing, so I'm here to learn on how to do that. But it does bring up anxiety and shyness, and I think guilt as well, just because I feel like there's so many places that people can give, so I need to sort of figure out how to connect with them and try to advocate for what I need and not overwhelm them. So that's it.
Thank you. Is that everyone?
I think a few people, I think Nadia
is chatting.
Put it in the comments. Yeah, in the chat.
All right.
If anyone else would like to unmute, go ahead. If not, we can move on and you can just introduce yourself in the chat.
So I wanted to sort of reflect on and thank you, first of all, thank you for being here, for sharing why you're here and why this is important to you. And I also wanted us to reflect a little bit about the emotions that people shared when fundraising is something you have to do, or fundraising is something that you, like a word that you hear. So when I was first starting out, I was also really scared and nervous and anxious. And having done this professionally for, a decade, it has changed, not so drastically, but like, I think you do get nervous, you do still get scared. And I think that has to do with, somebody had said, the vulnerability, right? Because these are relationships that you are trying to maneuver through. And there is this place of being rejected, right? And none of us like to be rejected. But there's another thing that I think that most people don't think about is our own personal relationship with money and the way that it kind of comes out when we have to ask for money from others, right? And so we're already working in a space where we're advocating for communities that are being, oppressed, exploited, they're targeted for various reasons. And what we're trying to do is return them to a place where they are not being negatively or adversely affected. So I think a lot of us just kind of go into it wanting to do what needs to get done, but not necessarily allowing for us to have a space to really think about what fundraising actually is, right? So I think a lot of us have preconceived notions about what fundraising is, why we don't like it, but then why we have to do it. So I think what I'm asking everyone here is to really think about, because like a lot of the people said, I mean, one of the first person to share was like, it's horror. A lot of people said it's, for them, it's anxiety. A lot of people shared stress, right? And fear. So think about your relationship with money and then like how those emotions may be translating that for you when you actually have to go to somebody, be vulnerable, and ask for resources, right? And so to help you shift that, what I'd like to propose is, and I believe somebody actually used the term necessary evil. It is necessary, but it is not necessarily an evil, right? I think what happens is there is a power dynamic that is happening between people who have resources and then people who don't have resources. So you feel like you have to conform to other people's expectations to be able to get the resource that you're trying to go for, right? And so what my invitation for today's workshop, as well as for the rest of the workshops for this month, is to really reflect upon your relationship with money, your understanding of the power dynamics that exist in the resources that people need while pursuing fundraising. And how do you, or how can we kind of flip that script and see the people that we are reaching out to help us fundraise for the amazing things that like all of us are doing in a way where it's not like they're checking boxes and you're checking boxes, but it's a real partnership and an opportunity that you are offering to them to be able to use their resources, which in our case would be, funding for impact that particular funder is actually looking for, right? So that is my invitation as we go into this series of workshops. So next slide, please. So these are our goals for today, which is basically, I honestly would like us to become more comfortable and more confident in pursuing funding, sharing knowledge and real life experiences that hopefully will increase fundraising success for all of us, and sharpening research skills to find those grants that we need, and then obviously increasing knowledge of the grant writing process, and also just fundraising and philanthropy at large. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to do was, instead of just diving into like, this is what a grant looks like, this is how we should be writing grants, what I wanted to do was really put it into context that this is part of a system. I don't like using that word, but it's part of a system. And it's basically, there are a lot of words that get thrown at us all the time. And I wanted to kind of take a little bit of time for us to see the various terms and actually what they end up meaning. And then once we are very comfortable in the way that they're showing up, it just helps us do our jobs better. So I think all of us have heard these terms before: philanthropy, fundraising, and development. And I think at various times we think that all of these words basically mean the same thing, but in fact they actually don't, right? And so just having that clarification in these terms, I think, is helpful as we progress towards getting better at raising resources for our respective organizations. Next slide, please. So just, these are really basic definitions of the three terms, right? So philanthropy is something that we're always hearing, especially when we are looking for institutional donors or foundations. And I just wanted to share that philanthropy it comes from the Greek phrase philanthropia, which means literally to love people, right? And so, and I'm talking about philanthropy in the US. I'm not talking about philanthropy outside of the US. And one thing that I failed to mention actually is where I currently am working. So I am the Director of Partnerships and Fundraising at Ashoka for our Global Venture and Fellowship team. And so Ashoka is a global organization and it has offices in 40 different countries. And we are the organization that built the field of social entrepreneurs. And being in the global office, what I have to do is coordinate a lot of our fundraising across these various offices. And one of the biggest challenges for me has been that our default has always been philanthropy in the US, and actually philanthropy looks very different outside of the US and what that means, right? So I just wanted to share that philanthropy in the US basically started, I think, back with the Puritans, and it was more, coupled with being charitable. And then once it started becoming professionalized, which was, I believe, back in either World War I or II, I can't remember. That's when it just kind of started to shift and become a kind of sector. And so so charity basically evolved into philanthropy, like this overarching frame. And it comes from loving people, right? Like love thy neighbor concept. And then fundraising is basically the raising of assets and resources, right? And whether we do it professionally, we've definitely done it in our personal lives. This is a question that I usually ask our interns when I'm giving them just a basic training around fundraising, like, have you ever fundraised before? And usually people think about fundraising in a professional sense, but not necessarily in the personal sense of like when we needed something and we had to approach our parents or maybe an older sibling or maybe aunts and uncles to help us raise the money that we needed for whatever it is that we wanted, right? Or perhaps in school, we were part of a sports team or a band and had to sell candy bars to raise funds, right? So for a lot of people, that's the first time that they're introduced to fundraising. But just bottom line, it's being able to raise assets and resources to support an organization or a specific project. But what I really want us to remember is when I was talking about like our relationship with money earlier, I really also want us to think about the power dynamics that get involved when we start, especially talking about money. And fundraising is always seen as, you know, the person who's asking for money has less power than the person who actually has the money or resources, right? And so I want us to shift that perspective and really think about the fact that it's an exchange. So the person that has the funding is looking to spend that funding, right? To have a particular impact. And our job is to make sure that they understand that there is alignment with how we would use that funding to further the impact that they're looking for. So that is what fundraising is, right? An exchange where a donor supports you to do the work that they can't do, right? And another thing is like foundations are in the business of giving money away, right? So the clearer and the stronger that we can make that type of argument for them, the easier it gets to get the type of funding that we need for our organization. And then development is, I actually have a lot of feelings about this word, but in the context of fundraising, it's the planning and, you know, implementing of the programs that are meant to increase contributed financial support for an organization. So development and fundraising are more technical, and then philanthropy is the framework that's holding all of this together. Any questions at this point? All right, next slide, please. So what is a grant? Grants are just non-repayable funds that one party, and it depends on which party it is, that gives to a nonprofit entity or an educational institution or a business or an individual, right? So they are not loans, but they are basically disbursements of money that don't have to be paid back. And they're usually made to nonprofit endeavors. Grants in the sense that we're talking about, right? I'm not going to read all of that. Next slide, please. So there are a variety of grant funders. I've mentioned foundations, and there are particularly very different types of foundations. There are private foundations, like the Ford Foundation, like the Kellogg Foundation, Carnegie are a few examples. There are public foundations like the Proteus Fund, where I used to work, and community foundations, like the Houston Endowment in Texas. And then there are corporate foundations. So a lot of corporations want to also look good for their, you know, for their consumers, and just have a better PR about their work. So they set up foundations, but there are two ways you can get money from corporations. It's either through their foundations, which is much more limited, versus their marketing departments. And with corporate foundations, the relationship is more about how much you can, kind of like how many eyeballs would see the good work that they're doing by partnering with you. So if it makes sense, foundations are basically the first place they will send you to get some type of grant. But if they see kind of like the value in how you can make them into a better feel-good story for their customers, that's when they sometimes introduce you to their marketing departments, and their marketing departments actually have unlimited budgets. in all my experience, I think I've only been successful once, where the foundation actually let us into their marketing department to have like a better budget for a particular program that we were doing. And then the government. You can look for government grants, citywide, state, or on the federal level. Next slide, please. Okay, so why do funders give? And I think this is really important to understand. People give money because they want to give money. Funders are getting savvier, and especially individual donors, they're getting more savvier about the investments they're going to make in areas that they feel they want to make an impact in. And so that means that like when we are presenting why our value add to them, we need to just have in the back of our minds that people give money because they want to give money, right? People give money to people and not programs. And so it's a relationship that we are starting with our funders. And even if our programs look amazing and there isn't necessarily a personal connection between the people, sometimes you may not get the most, the biggest grant you could perhaps from a funder. And I've seen that happen, unfortunately. And that's because even with the best of ideals and intentions, it's people who are making decisions, and people will still like I guess, for lack of a better term. People also like to give money to opportunities and not deficits. And so that just goes back to like how we're running our organizations. People give money to successful organizations and not distressed ones. And that just means that, like, not to say that organizations shouldn't talk about challenges, but if an organization is perpetually just presenting itself in a negative way, that's going to limit funding and perhaps even stop people from wanting to support you. And people give money to make a change for the good, right? But the most important reason is people don't give unless they are asked. And for grant writing, that's not that difficult to remember, but still I've seen a lot of grant proposals where people have not asked for a lot of money because they're shy about asking for what they need, or have submitted grant proposals without an ask, if you can believe it. Like they've put everything in their proposal but the ask, right? So that's a very important point to drive home, is that people won't give unless they are asked, even when you're writing grant proposals. Next slide, please. So what are funders thinking? Like I mentioned earlier, basically when people are wanting to support projects, they especially institutional funders, they are in the business of giving money away, but they want to match their goals and their priorities, and they want to have a significant impact. And as I mentioned earlier, corporate funders, they want to support projects that also match their goals and priorities, but with theirs, it's more about marketing and making sure that whatever they're doing is going to make their current customers happy and also recruit new customers, right? They also want to have a significant impact, but the biggest thing that's driving them is getting them visibility. So it's a way to market themselves and build goodwill from customers. Next slide, please. All right. So how do we know, since there are lots of grants that are out there, we have foundations that are making grants, we have corporate foundations that are making grants, and we have government entities that are making grants, and we have individual donors who are making grants, right? They may have a family foundation, or they may just be doing it kind of outside of that realm. So how do you kind of start to put some semblance of a plan together or a strategy together to understand who you would like to pursue, right? So assessing if a funder is a fit, you really need to understand the funder's interests and priorities. You also have to see kind of like how much work goes into applying for a grant. So what is the potential award amount, and what is the need on your end that you would like to take care of? What is the complexity of the application process? I heard in the introductions that a lot of people are doing this not as part of huge development departments. It's maybe yourself, or maybe like 2 or 3 other people, right? But I think majority of the people on the call are kind of pursuing these on their own. And so you have to kind of balance all of this when you're trying to figure out which funder to pursue, right? And the timeline, the deadline for submitting application, because the same amount of effort goes into raising $1,000 as it does $10,000, as it does $100,000. So like understanding that, how are you going to kind of pursue the right funders, and doing it in a way that is intentional yet strategic, so that you come out of there with the most funding to be able to not just meet your budget for the current fiscal year, but perhaps build some so that like future fiscal years are sort of taken care of, or in the process of being taken care of. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a question that I'm posing to the group. You can write your answer in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and answer. Basically, how do you go about seeking grants for your organization? So right now, as the person who is responsible for grant writing, how are you seeking grants for your organizations? So we have in chat, no idea, from Khadija.
I get emails. So I'm in the, I get emails from like what's it called? Grant Station.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it's
Grant
called.
Station or something?
Yeah, I think it's Grant Station, and I had signed up for it a couple of years ago. I'm no longer a member, but they still send me emails. And even with in every email, it'll tell you different opportunities that are coming up. So that's one way. And then also just emails from organizations like Islamic Relief or Penny Appeal, like sometimes just I'm on their email list. So in their emails, they'll have like, oh, grant opportunity. And I just click on everything.
Anyone else? There were a lot of no clue, no idea, networking and connections, and researching for grants applications. Heard about grant opportunities from like-minded organizations, Googling. These are all good ideas. I also have seen the question, Nadia, and I will address it in a minute. Partners, emails. Is it worth signing up for these paid databases about grants? This is from Khadija. That's a great question. I would say it depends, honestly. It depends on what type of organization you are looking for funding for. It depends on how much funding you're looking for. And honestly, I feel like there's enough information out there to not necessarily think about finding these opportunities through a paid option until and unless you have exhausted kind of like all of the options that are free. So we'll go over some in a minute. I have some coming up on particular ways you could be researching. Emails, researching on the net, joining e-newsletter from foundations. Yes, Urshia, like that's a great suggestion. That's what I actually do. The foundations that I currently am being funded by and foundations I want to be funded by. I go on there and I subscribe to their e-newsletters because that's the best way to actually understand what motivates their giving, right? And so that is, as a person who's responsible for fundraising, that's basically part of what you're doing, is trying to figure out who is wanting to make the impact in the space that we're making an impact in, right? And then basically merging the two so that everyone leaves happy after that partnership is put together. Plan social events. Nadia, may I ask you to kind of elaborate on that? What do you mean plan social events?
Yes, so for example, we do some events sometimes to promote some kind of training or educations on and share it, and then we just open the floor for like questions and answers, and volunteering to participate and to support the organization.
Okay, thank you. That actually reminds me of something that we were doing when I was at Proteus, and those were site visits. I know that doing site visits during a pandemic is not something, it's not an option, but maybe virtually that could be something that people could consider doing. But basically what that is inviting your supporters already, right? People who have bought into what you do, as well as asking them to invite others who they think would be a good match, meaning another foundation that is not currently giving to you, but they have some type of relationship with, to bring them along and then do some type of event where you're highlighting your programs, your staff, and the community that you're serving, so that it gives a different perspective of basically what your grant proposal would do in a narrative form and in a budget, but this is kind of like a 3D model of your grant proposal. But I realize that's not the answer to the question that I myself posed. And yes, there is a lot of free information online about what grants are available and who is giving them. So the reason why I posed this question is that before we can even start putting together a grant proposal, what we have to do is figure out who it is we're going to be writing a grant to. So can we go to the next slide? Oops. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess we can skip prospect research and go there. So where to find grants? Have people heard of the Foundation Center? Now it's known as Candid, I believe. Yes, no?
No.
No? So the Foundation Center was basically founded because foundations got together and realized that people weren't actually knocking on their doors, asking for money. And they realized that just because they existed didn't mean that people knew that they existed. And so they actually pulled some money together to get this center going. And it's one of its responsibilities is basically putting together a database of the various foundations that exist in the US and where they give, how they give, who is on their board, who is their staff, that kind of stuff. So that was kind of the impetus of the Foundation Center, and it's evolved into a much bigger apparatus. They also have various workshops that people can attend, from the most basic to the most kind of complicated. And I think they have free offerings as well as paid offerings. And I believe the Foundation Center recently went through kind of like a name change and is now known as Candid. So you can actually look for this URL and you would still get to Candid, or look for Candid and you can get to the Foundation Center. The only bad thing is that to really utilize this resource, you do have to be a paying member. There are some searches you can do for free, but they're not as comprehensive as if you were to have a subscription to the Foundation Center's online directory. However, the Foundation Center is available through various libraries and some other institutions that have a partnership with them. And so I should have put these links in the doc so that you could share this, but I can share these with you later. There is a regional Foundation Center in Orange County Library System. And I'm not sure how they're doing this on during COVID, but basically pre-COVID time, you could go to the library and access everything for free. So if there's a Foundation Center hub in your city, you can actually physically go to the center and like look up anything and everything under the sun for free. But if you're unable to do that, that's why you would have to subscribe to their online portal. But they've also given access to other institutions. So usually libraries have access to them, as well as some other places. So when I was putting this presentation together, I was focusing it on kind of Florida-based institutions. And so the first thing that popped up for Orlando was that it is available through the Orange County library system. I just don't know, because of COVID times, like how you would be accessing it. But I would think that if you have a library card, you could possibly be able to access it by going into the library's webpage and then accessing it from there. But that's something worth exploring for folks on the call. Another way to find grants is to look for local or regional associations of grant makers. And so basically just, like the fourth bullet says Google, you can put that into Google and you can find, and then put where you are located, and it will bring up lots of options for you. So one of the things that kept on coming up for me when I was doing this for Florida is the Florida Philanthropic Network. And it will show you kind of like community foundations or the like type of grant makers in your area. So not just the national funders that basically everyone sort of knows about and everyone has in their pipeline to be pursuing on some type of level. And also the Fundraising Authority blog is a great resource just in general, but also how to find grants. And then Google is a great resource. It's, you know, whatever you need, whenever I need to find anything, I will put, you know, if it's a community foundation that I would like to pursue, or, you know, a local one or grant makers. And then you put together kind of like your subject area as well as kind of your location. It will pop up a lot of options for you. Okay, make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat.
There's also this one that someone had told me about. It's called Instrumental.
I'm sorry, I think it's saying my internet is unstable. So Sadaf, I missed whatever you said.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm saying that there's this one platform, it's one organization. I think it's just an online thing. It's called Instrumental, and it has a free 2-week trial period. After that, it's expensive, but you can literally just join for 2 weeks, do a bunch of research, and then not subscribe to it. And it had amazing resources on there. I'll share the link. Yikes. Samin, do you hear us?
Now I do.
Okay, good.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Yes, the directory is expensive, but there are ways to access it. I strongly suggest seeing, they have like a search locator on their website. Put in your, what do you call those things? Zip codes, and it should give you an idea of who may have it near you, so that you can kind of like see if you can access it for free. All right, so when I was doing this presentation, I kind of focused on Florida as the prospect for our research examples. And so basically when I typed in like the top Florida foundations, I was directed to a report that I think is available on Candid. And I can share that link with the Florida folks later. And I'm positive that similar reports exist for the various other sections of the country. So I'm pretty positive there's a similar report for Illinois. So basically, Florida is home to 5,743 foundations, right? Cumulatively, their assets are 33 billion, and their giving is 2.2 billion. And this is data from 2018. So a lot of us, when we're looking for grants, when we're thinking about grants, when we're talking to other people about grants, we feel the competitiveness, right, from other organizations, because we have bought into the idea of the scarcity model. Like there's only X amount of money that's available to be funded. There's only X amount of foundations that are doing these things. But there are 5,743 foundations in Florida alone. So, and they have assets of 33 billion, and their giving is 2.2 billion. That's a lot of money. That is not a scarcity model. we don't have to be scared about whether there is enough money and whether I need to be mean to my, partnering organization or my similarly situated organization to beat them to the punch so that like I can get the funding and they can't, right? So there's definitely enough money out there for all of us to be able to raise and to outfit our organizations to basically fully, right? Next slide, please.
I mean, somebody asked about getting the data for other organizations. Where did you find it? Did you just Google it? Florida?
I just Googled it. I just Googled Florida. I think it was like top Florida foundations. And that's where I got the link from. But I'm happy to like do it again. Hold on, let me see. If this is, okay, hold on. This is for the Florida one, but I'm pretty sure you're able to find it for. Oops, it didn't highlight it because I typed it in with the www. But if you were to take that, if somebody can do that for me while I'm talking, this will take you to basically the southwestern US and its report, but I'm pretty sure that like there's a link there for the rest of the US. So basically when I went to that report, it gives you a lot of information. Is it? Shoot. Okay, hold on. That's what it's saying for me. Hold on. Try that. All right. So before we know how to pursue whom, it's good to understand kind of like the giving space where we're looking, right? And so just based on kind of like the Florida Foundation for Giving, on the left you see the asset range, and then on the right you see the giving range. And I wanted to kind of look at the giving range of the Florida foundations. And so you can see like under 5,000 all the way to 25 million plus, right? And usually when we think about like how much people or foundations are giving away, we think about like a couple of $1,000s, right? Until we see like other nationally based organizations and they're getting like 6-figure gifts. But what's interesting here is the most grants that Florida foundations are actually giving is within the 100 to $500,000 range, right? And so how many of us in Florida-based organizations were even thinking about pursuing grants in the 6-figure gifts? How many were thinking about exploring 25 to 50? Right? So this is information that is really helpful because it can change how you're going to even think about your programming, how you're going to think about pitching. Maybe you don't want to just do programming. Maybe there's an opportunity to think about general operating support, right? So that's where this type of research and data is helpful before you even sit down to write a grant proposal. We should not leave money on the table because we think there isn't that much money to begin with that's on the table, right? Next slide, please. So this report also kind of does a breakdown on the different areas that Florida foundations usually give to. So as we can see on this chart, the education is by far the leader. It's like over $400 million invested. If you're in agriculture, fishing, and forestry, not so much, but I don't think we have that problem in this group, hopefully. I think most of us are probably somewhere in community and economic development, human rights, health, could be environment, human services. So as we can see on this chart, there's substantial amount of money that is going to support those types of subject areas, right? Next slide, please. They also, I think they have a top 25, but I wanted to share the top 10. Same report. All of this data is in there. These are the top 10 funders. And I picked a particular subject area. So I did community and economic development. And so these are the top 10 funders for community and economic development in Florida. There are huge gaps. Like number one is the Knight Foundation. I think most people are familiar with the Knight Foundation. It's 26.8 million. And then there's the Thomas W. Smith Foundation, which is 1.6 million. So that doesn't mean that just because they have less money that there isn't a lot of opportunity for your organization. It just means that you want to research more, right? Because like when I see this list, I'm like going to focus on 26.8 and think like, this is where I have the most opportunity to get a grant, perhaps, but like everyone else is also thinking the same thing, right? So you have to be strategic yet intentional, right? And so this type of research helps us figure out how we should be positioning the resources that we have in order to get the resources that we want. And like I said, what is it, like 5,700, over 5,700 foundations, and these are just the top 10. Yes, I would be happy to share the slides with everyone. Next slide. Okay, I'm not a graphic designer, so this is why this is not the best picture in here. But what I wanted to also show is another great way to figure out if you are a good fit with the funder is to just go to the funder's website and look for the grants that they've made this year or in the past, right? And so this is what I did. I went to the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation's website and looked for the grants that they've made. And as you'll see on the left-hand side, you can filter through, right? You can filter through the different programs that they support and the year awarded. So for my filter, I had picked communities. And I didn't pick a particular year, I just left it open. So they have data, it seems to at least like 5 years of data. And these came up, right? So something called Venture Cafe Miami got 160,000. Miami Herbert Business School, 100,000. The Idea Center at Miami-Dade College, 50,000. Craftspeople, 140,000. So what does this type of information tell me? That shows me that they give six-figure gifts, right? Like very easily, like there's 160, 100,000, 140,000. It also shows me what type of organizations they're giving to, right? And maybe I have a relationship with one of the organizations that is popping up here as a grantee. And maybe I can call them up and ask them about their partnership or their support by this foundation, right? And maybe I can ask for, and if it seems like maybe there is synergy between my organization and that foundation, maybe an introduction can be done through that partnering organization, right? So like thinking about all the different ways through which you can figure out a good fit with an organization. All that is kind of set out for you on their website.
I have a question, Samin.
Yes.
So say if my organization has a budget of like 160,000, right? So my grant that I'm going to be asking for is going to be a lot smaller, but all of these amounts are like super big. So is that say something like if I'm not needing that huge amount, should I still go to this foundation?
I mean, that's a great question. I think yes, because you are a small organization today, but you're not going to be a small organization tomorrow, right? So you have the opportunity to also think about, perhaps this is all I need for right now, but I can do so much more with, if I had more funding. So maybe it's worth exploring. Do they do capacity grant making, capacity building grant making? Is there a way to maybe grow a program we're already doing because there is such great synergy between what they support and what I'm offering as an organization? So is there an opportunity to build that program? Is there an opportunity to get more general operating support? So I think I don't think people should write off anything. It's a opportunity to really think about, maybe you want to stay at $160,000. And I'm pushing you to become a bigger organization. But maybe it's like thinking about not just about today's needs, but like where you would like to be 3 years from now, from 5 years from now, and like thinking really long-term about those kinds of things. And also, the budget that you have, is it the right budget for the organization? Because I think there's a tendency for nonprofits and an expectation, unfortunately, that because there is this passion to do good in the world, that it should be done on a shoestring budget, right? And so we're always undermining the value of our services and putting in like, and I hate this because I've had to go through with it with our funders. When I worked for the Proteus Fund, I had a bit more leverage and I could have these kind of straightforward talks with our funders where I challenged them to think about like how they're showing up in the space, right? So it's unfair to say, I don't believe in what you're doing, but you're doing great work. You have to prove yourself. So I'm going to give you $10,000, but I want you to change the reality for 100,000 people or for 500,000 people, right? Like it's always like, I'll give you a little bit, but you have to give me back a lot, right? And so what we end up doing is we cut costs and we cut the wrong costs. And then we go to funders and we ask for 10,000 and we get 10,000, right? And so what I will challenge us to do is to really think about, are our budgets reflective of the reality of the work that needs to happen? Are my people being paid equitably? Like, are the services being represented in an equitable way? And so I think that would change, like the perspective needs to change on our end, so that like when we're having these conversations with funders, we can hold them accountable to the talk that they've been saying about like being better partners and supporting people.
There was a question in the comments in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's unfortunately that's hard because Islamophobia is real. And just because funders are progressive, that does not necessarily mean they're not Islamophobic. And so there's a lot of education that needs to still happen in philanthropy around around Muslim organizations. So they don't even have to be necessarily connected to like a masjid, but just generally, it is challenging. And I think a lot of foundations also don't give money to religious institutions, right? And so that is actually a challenging scenario. And I don't necessarily have a good answer to that right now. I think I need to reflect on that a little more and perhaps like reach out to some friends and colleagues to think about that a bit more. But that's a great question.
You know, I've seen with the Muslim funder, Muslim organization funding, I think some good places to turn to are like Islamic Relief, Penny Appeal. Like these organizations have really come to the realization that a lot of the money that they have, they need to invest it locally. And they've been doing a lot of work, especially during the pandemic, to support Muslim organizations, to keep them sustainable when they, you know, when fundraising is hard. And I think those are some really good resources. And but they do have a grant writing process. Like you have to submit a grant application to get that funding. So this is definitely beneficial, but those are some organizations that you can definitely turn to.
Thank you. Rachel is saying, I am often afraid to speak about our ideas because I am afraid they will be stolen. I've actually been told by Orange County employees off the record to not apply because they will steal the idea and do it themselves. How do I know who I can trust when sending proposals? I'm sorry that is actually something that can happen. I think this goes to the crux of building relationships, right? So I would say that like when the trust comes when you've built that relationship, and perhaps like I haven't written proposals for like on the county level or the city level. My grants have always been on the federal level. So I haven't had to encounter this type of challenge. But what I would say is when you are pursuing something like this, really invest the time in getting to know the person who would be in charge of reviewing your proposal. And if that trust can be made, then like that, it wouldn't be this problematic. But if it's just someone has told you not to do it for this particular department, then I would say like, unfortunately, that is the reality and not to pursue that, but then to try to find someone, a funder that is maybe an institutional funder or a corporate foundation, or even maybe an individual donor or a group of individual donors that can support that idea. All right, next slide, please. So these are just some more tips of how to go about seeking grants. It really takes time to figure out who it is that you would like to pursue. But it is really worth it because then you are being very strategic and intentional. So just a few do's and don'ts. Be realistic in your expectations. If you've done the research, that's going to be easy. Make use of the available resources to conduct a thoughtful and targeted search, right? So not just doing kind of like very broad searches, but really understanding what it is that you do and what you're trying to fund is going to make you stand out from everyone else who's doing the same thing or has like, you know, an approach of just finding a funder. Do not get caught up with searching for the ideal funder. There is no necessarily ideal funder out there. It's just being cognizant of the people who are in the business of giving money away, figuring out what their priorities are and making sure that they're aligned with yours, right? Like I said, just in Florida, 5,743 foundations. And that's just in the state of Florida. Then we have 49 other states, right? And and just because they're not located in Florida doesn't mean that they won't geographically give to somebody who is based in Florida. And do not compile lists of hundreds of funders and attempt to pursue them all. Like that does not work, right? We are one person, and there's just so much research and pursuing that you can do. That's why like you really need to understand what it is that you're doing, and then kind of start looking. One of the best things to do is basically look at similarly situated organizations and see who's funding them, right? And then and see like, okay, well, we do similar programming or we serve the same population who are, you know, Ford is, I don't like to do this, but I don't know the local foundations. So I will just use national foundations like Ford Foundation or the Kellogg Foundation is supporting them. Why aren't they supporting me? So that means like, let me go to their website. Let me look at their 990. Let me look at, you know, their blog to see what it is they're supporting and how maybe I can make the connection to my work. Usually what I also do is like, usually people say like when they start making a list, they put Oprah Winfrey on their prospect as a prospect. And it's like, Oprah is tapped out. She has a lot of money, but everyone is pursuing her. She has some donor fatigue. So let's leave Miss Winfrey alone. There are lots of other people who we can be going after. Yeah. Next slide, please.
I just wanted to add something to, I'm sorry to keep saying it, but over here locally in Orlando in Central Florida, we have the Central Florida Foundation. And Muslim Women's Organization has like a profile on there. They have a whole nonprofit search that you have to set up your profile, put all your information in. But then funders, like donors, can actually fund your organization through their foundation, and that foundation itself gives grants. But I was looking through their nonprofit search. Ours is like the only Muslim organization on there. I think there's a lot of opportunity for Muslim organizations to even locally just apply for, just be part of these local foundations, searches and platforms, because people are just not taking advantage of that. We have it locally here too. If anybody wants information on that, just connect with me afterwards, message me, and I can send that to you.
I would actually also say like, Sadaf, you can have a conversation with them and say like, hey, how come we're the only Muslim organization that you're supporting?
I am. So they actually have this whole Thrive, this initiative going on right now, where they have identified priorities for the community based on the development goals, you know, the world, what is it called? Sustainable Development Goals that the UN set. And they're looking at the community here locally in Central Florida for who can we support to help meet these goals as a community. So they've been talking to me because I show up at their stuff, right? So I'm like the Muslim person they know apparently. So they reached out to me and I said, listen, I'm just one person. There are so many organizations here that are led by Muslims that I can connect you to that need to be part of this. Like, you want to tackle this whole problem of homelessness or, you know, all of these things. There are other organizations you need to be talking to, not just me, that are helping. So they are trying on, you know, but still it's all just, it isn't a lot of people that look like us. So it's an uphill climb, but I think they are making that effort. So if anybody does want to connect with them, just talk to me and I'll try to connect you with them.
Yeah, so just some basic research strategies. This is something that I've kind of touched upon already, but as you're looking for funders, think about the subject area, that you are in. So go basically Google who is funding, supporting your programs or type of programs or the subject area that you're handling. You can also use the geographic approach, basically foundations that are set up to fund programs in a particular city or a state or a region. And also, there are lots of foundations that give nationally that you could qualify for, or internationally. Those are a bit limited, but I think just starting from like a particular city or region and even nationally would be helpful. And then the type of support that you need, right? I think people always default to programmatic support, but there's just more type of support that people can be actually thinking about. So general operating support is something that everyone needs, right? Like that's the unrestricted funding that most organizations need so that they can decide where the funds should go. And philanthropy is coming around to that. Like there was a lot of talk that was happening about it. Like there was awareness that was built or conversations that were had. And now it's shifting towards people basically saying, yeah, like it makes more sense for us to give organizations money for general operating support so that they can actually build the capacity of their organizations so that they're better handling the programmatic support that they're doing, right? So as you're planning which funders or which grants to pursue, think about the variety of funding that is out there. It could also be like maybe you're trying to get a particular program off the ground. There's different seed money, right? So when you're Googling or looking for support, don't just put programmatic support or general operating support. Like try to become a bit more creative about how you can find funders through different type of funding strategies. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm thinking now that this one should have come after the one that comes next, but basically this is about finding the alignment that you need to have with your potential funder. So it's basically not leaving any stone unturned. The best way to do this is to study the funder that you'd like support from. So it's basically, like I mentioned before, if I want to get funding from a particular foundation or even a corporation, I go and I sign up for their e-newsletters. It's a lot of time to invest to read them, but it's worth it because either very early on in the process, it will become obvious that there is no connection. There is absolutely no alignment and you can unsubscribe. But on the other hand, there are lots of ways that you can start seeing like the way that they're talking about supporting a particular program or a community is exactly the way that you're showing up in the space. And then all you need is a bit more information to be able to kind of say what you're doing, but using their terms so that they really understand how the two are connected, right? So it's kind of like how in DC, people who are applying for government jobs are told to take the words that are used in the job announcement itself and put it in their resumes, right? So that when you're speaking the same language as the person who is looking for that opportunity of support, your likelihood of getting supported goes up. Next slide, please. So these are the various ways that you can understand a particular foundation. So their website is a gold mine, though sometimes, and this is really frustrating, it's a common trend that the bigger foundations are doing. Like every few years, they say that they have to re-strategize and think about like the way that they're doing grant making. And so they pause and they don't put too much information on their website about how they're changing or maybe changing the way that they're doing their grant making. But the foundation website is a gold mine, as is their annual report, where they kind of like piece together, like this is how we've been supporting since our founding versus like 5 years ago versus like this past year. So understanding that type of trajectory is helpful when you're trying to figure out like if this is the right funder that we want to pursue. I don't know if people have actually done this, but like the 990s for private foundations is another way to figure out how much money they're giving to organizations and how much and for what. So I wish I had put a picture of a 990 in the presentation, but basically if you were to, let me see if I can find one. Really.
Where do you find the 990s?
Yeah, I'm gonna, it's just, okay, let's do this. Ford Foundation 990. Let me do this. Okay. So all I did was in Google, I did Ford Foundation 990. And you can do that for any foundation. And it should, if they filed their 990s, it should come up. Here, it doesn't give you the form, you have to download it. But basically you can see like the Ford Foundation has its financial information on their website. Let me see if I can find a better one. Yeah, their 2018 isn't on here. But yeah, it's as simple as just putting in 990 and the foundation's name and it should come up. They also have guidelines, right? Like some big foundations also have on their web pages like this is something that we're looking for. This is the deadline. These are the guidelines. So request for proposals also gives you an idea about like what they're looking for. As I mentioned before, newsletters. And then press releases. Press releases, I don't know if people were following particular foundations as the pandemic started to become a much longer reality than what people were initially thinking. A lot of the big foundations actually put out a lot of press releases on how much money they're going to be dedicating to particular areas. So basically the pandemic has unveiled all the systemic problems that all of the organizations have been pointing to for years, right? And now somehow it's become more real. And all these foundations have now gotten together, huddled, and said, this is problematic. We can't let this continue. Collectively, we're putting X billion dollars forward, right? So those types of press releases are important because then you can find kind of those connections back to your work. And then it also gives you an entry point to reach out to those foundations and ask for a conversation and say like, this aligns with what we do. We've been doing this for X amount of years. This is the type of support we need, we want. Can we have a conversation with you? And then grants lists, which are more kind of available in databases and are a bit more trickier to get to than just Googling. And next slide, please. All right. So should we apply for a grant? And I really want to emphasize the no here. I will go back to the yes, but really the no is usually when organizations are looking for funding. Sometimes they sacrifice what they do to be able to be funded. And what does that mean? That basically means that the grant is more in favor of the grantor than it is for the grantee. So I want you to really think about, does this opportunity further what I'm already doing versus does this opportunity, this funding opportunity further what the funder wants to be doing? And it's not really what we want to be doing, but it's sort of in that same category. And maybe we'll have to do another program, but I'm at least bringing money into my organization, right? So let's not chase money for the sake of chasing money. Let's be more intentional about who it is we are choosing to partner with. So yes, you should apply for that grant. If that grant is going to cover your operating expenses, that grant is going to support your existing activities or perhaps seed new ones. And if that grant is going to expand your activities in a way that is productive and is in line with and advances your mission, right? Like we don't want to get into partnerships where it's going to become a headache for you. And then like if we remember to the slide before, people give money to people, not programs, right? And then you don't want to end up having a relationship with a potential funder or a funder where they didn't have the greatest experience, you didn't have the greatest experience, and they go and talk about you in a negative way with other people who could potentially be funding you and would have been a better fit for you. Next slide, please. Oops, I'm sorry, I have not been monitoring chat. So Amber asked, will you address asking for government grants? Are they easier, harder, different methods? Government grants are a different animal altogether. Like we would need an entire workshop on just that. And I've attended like day-long ones where I'm just like, this is ridiculous. Because they're the government and because they have so much oversight on the way that they spend their money, that type of granting is a bit more complicated than if you were to submit a grant to the Ford Foundation. So unfortunately for this series, I am not going to do a deep dive into government grants at all. But I can try to find some resources for you to be able to like consider that as a strategy for your organization. But even if you were to Google it, I'm sure there would be resources that would come up to help you figure out how to successfully pursue a government grant. I remember I did one with, what is it called? VAWA. And we got like $1 million or something after a year and a half. And it was like, the grant proposal was like this thick. It was like, I can't even remember, and I was pulling my hair out. But after that, we decided we weren't going to go after those grants because it was just a lot of work that my team and I didn't want to invest in. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't, if that is something that you want to pursue. And so now I'm kind of just setting us up for the second workshop for next Tuesday, which is the proposal process. Next slide, please. So we've talked a lot today about how to pursue the right funder, right? And once we've identified the right funder, what is it that you need to be able to reach out to them? So basically, where do you start? How do you start? Start committing your ideas to paper. Really reflect upon what your program is so that you're able to really describe your program. Create a concept paper, a one-pager, some type of collateral, if you haven't already, about your organization, about your work, the type of impact you're having, the community that you're serving, what you would like to do, right? State your goals, your objectives, have a timeline, estimate the cost for staff, materials, and equipment. And I cannot highlight this enough. Please do not undermine yourself when you're doing these kinds of things, especially the budget. Like, don't make it affordable or cheap or, cost effective in what you think would be for the funder's eyes, right? We're doing great work. We deserve to be resourced at our fullest. And we should not be sacrificing our budgets along those lines. Also, have you thought about how you would, or are you evaluating your programs and its successes? Also having job descriptions job descriptions for your program staff. So a lot of grants actually ask for who it is that will be in charge of the different types of programming that you're writing in your proposal. And so just having all of this type of information handy before you jump into writing the proposal is a time saver, because usually, even if you have a team of people who are doing this, it's just good practice to have all of this information ready to go, up to date, so that when you're putting the proposal together, it's just a matter of copying and pasting and perhaps tweaking it for the particular funder. The question is, could you please describe what you meant by create a concept paper? So I misspoke there. I probably should have just said like a one-pager. So basically your case statement, why, who you are, a one-pager about yourself and your programs. So just having that clear language available to yourself as you sit down to put a proposal together, because as we'll see next week, we don't have a uniform way of putting proposals together. Like, different grant makers want different information. And so that's another conversation that Philanthropy is having, about having this one common grant application that organizations can put together and submit. So like, I don't know if for those who've actually written grants, you've seen sometimes you need 8 to 10 pages, right? Sometimes you need 20 pages of explanation. Sometimes people are cut off at character limits. And it's really frustrating, because how do I explain what I do in 3,500 characters? Like, how am I going to sit there and count my characters, right? And then copy and paste it into boxes and things like that. So so it's just important. That's why it's important to have kind of like these things kind of at the home before you start writing things or having to tweak things, so that you have resources to draw from. Is it the same as the executive? Yeah, it can be. You can say it's the executive summary or the abstract. Yeah. Next slide, please. So, okay, thank you. So basically just, I said this before too, like know exactly who you are as an organization and what you want to accomplish. Like clarity from the beginning will help you through this process. Building a relationship with the funding source. What does that mean? That basically means reaching out to the people that you want to be funded by, starting some type of communication with them, hopefully starting some type of relationship with them so that when you apply for a grant, it's not just another grant in the stack of proposals that they got, but a grant that they're familiar with because you reached out and started talking to them about what it is that you do, right? And so, as I had mentioned before, people give to people. Usually what happens is program officers have to pitch their ideas that they've gotten from the RFPs to their boards, right? And if your program officer really believes in what you're doing, they're able to convince the board in a very different way that you should be funded versus, yeah, I think this is an amazing idea, but I don't know anybody from that organization. I'm just going by or off of what they've submitted as a proposal. So I will give you one anecdote for us. For when I was at the Proteus Fund, we had reached out to a particular foundation. They're based in California. I didn't know anybody there. I looked on their website, Googled their website, went to their website, looked at people who were program officers under their human rights giving, because that was kind of where our program was fitting in. Got her email address, sent her an email. We talked to her on the phone. I mean, I was very privileged in the sense that we were able to travel. So my team flew to California. We had an in-person conversation with her. We came back to DC. A month later, she invited us to apply for funding. At that time, she was going to give us $75,000 because that threshold for them is easy, where if a program officer thinks $75,000 should go out the door, it can go out the door without any type of board approval. I pushed back and I said, I want more money and I want $250,000. And she said, okay, fine. That means it's a longer grant proposal, which we were able to kind of turn around really fast because I had all the other stuff that I needed for, just proposals in general. She pitched it at their next grant meeting. So I had to wait a month, and then she came back with the good news that it was approved, right? And I would not have even dared to have pushed back against $75,000 if I didn't have a relationship with her. But I invested the time in maintaining and establishing that relationship where she even felt that if she didn't think she could get the 250 through the board, she would have told me, Samin, just go with 75. Right? And next year we'll explore something bigger. But she was like, no, I really believe in what you guys are doing, and I will take this up with the board. And I'm also looking at time. I'm feeling like I'm not giving you guys enough time to ask questions if you have any. But basically, like, be prepared before you even start writing the grant proposal. And we'll do a very deeper dive next week on how to write that grant proposal. I know there's one more slide, but I don't think we need to go to it. It's basically the components of a proposal, but since we're going to do a deep dive next week anyways, I don't think you guys will miss out on that slide. So
there's a question in the chat?
Yes, so you can hire a grant writer. How are they normally compensated? They should have a flat fee for writing the grant. If someone is saying, I want a percentage of the grant amount that is going to be funded, stop talking to them. That is unethical. You should not be hiring someone who is looking at it that way. The grant writing portion should be separate from the amount of the proposal. What is a good rate for a grant writer? That's a great question. That actually, the answer is it depends. It depends on what your resources as an organization are, and kind of like how complex the grant is itself, and honestly also like how much you're going to be getting, right? Like if it's a $10,000 grant, you shouldn't be paying someone like $5,000 to write it, right? But the complex, like you would have to kind of balance the complexity of the application with the amount that you're trying to get to, and I was going to say the experience of the grant writer. These are all great questions. I've never had to hire a grant writer because I've always been the grant writer. I will look into I'll have better answers for you guys next week, if that's okay.
That was a lot of information. Thank you so much, Samin. So we have around 3 minutes left. What I wanted to do before we head out, Samin, do you have more? You're cool? We're going to continue next time. Okay, cool. So I have a couple of things before everyone heads out. Just some housekeeping things. I was going to ask everybody to submit a survey if you have some time. We would appreciate any feedback that you can give for how do you think the session went as far as length, and just anything else that you think you could have, we could have included, things like that. I'm adding a link here. So here's the feedback form. And if you could share your feedback, we would really appreciate it. We are, oh, I forgot to introduce myself. I realized there are some new faces here and I never introduced myself. I'm Sadaf Saeed. I'm the executive director of the Muslim Women's Organization. And a lot of people I know because you're local, but I'm really excited to see some new faces from different parts of the country. I think Zoom has allowed us to do a lot of these things that we would not have been able to do. So I appreciate you all taking the time to be here. And I would really like any feedback that you all could offer for us, and so that we can continue providing these kinds of skill building sessions for our community. And secondly, we are going to meet again next week on Tuesday at same time, same place. So you'll get the same link will work for you all. So you don't have to get a whole nother link. I'll send a just a reminder email out beforehand. And Samin has the slides and we have this recording. So the recording, it may take some time to kind of edit and process and put it up. But the slides we can send out along with the link for the feedback form and information for next time. Okay. But thank you all for joining us. We have just 1 minute left. If anybody has any final comments, you're welcome to unmute. Thank you, Samin, so much for sharing all of that information. Honestly, it was a lot. Thank you. Oh, wait, do we have homework?
I know, that's what I was going to say.
Samin.
I'm gonna assign homework.
Okay, good.
Okay, so my homework, my challenge to everyone is to research 2 funders that they would like to pursue for funding. And so keep in mind the deadlines, their grant making priorities, aligning with your mission, amount, so forth, right? And then extra credit is actually reaching out to the program officer and perhaps scheduling or having a chat with them. I know it's in a week, so having the chat would be much more challenging, but at least scheduling a chat with a program officer.
I'm kind of scared, I'm not gonna lie.
So I had shared with Sadaf that I did this a few months ago. I was looking for COVID-related funders because of the fellows and their particular work. I found one that I thought there would be alignment with. I found her email, sent her an email. We did a Zoom for 30 minutes. And she was basically like, I don't think this is going to work. I tried really hard to convince her otherwise, but she was adamant about it not working. And then you know what? That just meant that like now I know that this is someone that I don't need to pursue in my list of, you know, prospects. It was awkward and it kind of sucked, but you know, you can't win them all, unfortunately. And now I don't have to think about or waste my resources trying to pursue her, thinking like from afar, right? So like you can research as much as you want, but sometimes the best results are by just kind of reaching and getting that face-to-face or phone call conversation.
So we just go to their website and look at who we are and see who's the program officer and just kind of like, is there a company directory and just call randomly or call their office? How does that work?
Yeah, so I mean, basically what I've done is I've Googled program officer at whatever foundation, because most foundations are pretty good at putting their people up, right? And so you can go through kind of the list of folks that work at a particular foundation and find out where they work, right? And so if you've been doing your research, you understand like which program area they would be under. And then you just align with that, and then you see, you know, like this would be the person. Like as I mentioned in my my California example, we had no inroads to that organization. I just went on their website, looked under their human rights department, found the most senior person that was there, reached out to them. Yes, reach out prior to applying, because what I'm trying to get across is that it's relationship building. So it's organizing people. For those who are organizers on this call, this is no different than organizing for community. You're just doing it in philanthropy, right? It's a community of people who have resources that need to be organized around your cause. Okay, now I will stop talking.
Thank you. It's okay. We're going to hear a lot more from you next week, so we're good.
Yeah.
But we'll be sending the email out soon, so you all should have registered. So we have everybody's email addresses, and we'll send that out. And you can always email me or Samin, should I CC you on that email to everyone? So if they have any questions about the homework or whatever, they can reach out.
Yep. And
Okay.
I will PDF the slides so that everyone can also have them.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a really nice evening and a nice week, and we'll talk to you next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye all.
Bye.
Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
See you later.